Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program and webinar presented by ACP, the Association of Continuity Professionals. I'm ACP board member Ed Goldberg, and it is my pleasure and honor to host today's webinar, Modern DR Success Through Automation. We'll begin after just a couple of quick reminders. Today's webinar and our previous webinars are recorded, and they're made available to ACP members on the ACP website. If you have an idea for a webinar topic, please send it to staff@acp-international.com. Our guest speakers will be taking questions at the end, so please post your questions during the webinar in the question box in your control panel throughout the presentation. We'll get you a response to any questions we aren't able to answer now, so if you run out of time, we'll follow up with you. Today's webinar is brought to you by Strategic BCP, a corporate partner of ACP. Strategic BCP is global leader in business continuity risk management. Its Resilience One software helps customers elevate the productivity of their programs during disaster and business interruption situations. Strategic BCP's consulting organization helps navigate obstacles with BC, the DR, and strategic IT planning. We thank Strategic BCP for their support of ACP. Our webinar today is Modern DR Success Through Automation. Our presenter today is Christopher Duffy, Vice President of Professional Services at Strategic BCP. He'll be joined by Eric Jacobson, the Manager of BCDR and IT at the University of Kansas Hospital. The hospital is known as KU Med and is a nonprofit academic medical center and the region's only nationally verified Level 1 trauma center. It's with pleasure that I welcome first Christopher Duffy of Strategic BCP. Good morning or good afternoon, Christopher.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone, Ed. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce Eric Jacobson. He's the manager of the Business Continuity DR program at University of Kansas Hospital, and he has over 25 years of experience. Again, as Ed said, it's known as KMed. So Ed, let me just get started. So thank you again for joining us and sharing for your time and expertise. To start, why don't we do a step in a way back time machine? And when did you start in this role?
Well, I started actually with the health system in the year 2000, so about 17 years. I started the DR program here about 6-7 years ago.
Excellent. And so you mentioned the health system. How large is UMed?
With our new building that we just opened up, we have almost 900 beds on our main campus, a little over 1,200 people, excuse me, about 80 outpatient clinics, 2 other hospitals in other locations, one in Topeka and one in Hays, Kansas. We also provide medical services for the Chiefs, the Royals, and NASCAR facilities.
Great. So I can get tickets? Excellent. Big question here is that's a huge footprint. What's the affiliation with the actual university itself then?
Well, we actually do the training for their clinicians, for the clinical people, students. We do have some tie-in with them. We are a research facility also, so a lot of that is also done within the hospital. Our networks are connected between firewalls, but as the IT departments go, we really kind of keep that separate.
Oh, excellent. Well, let's stay on that whole IT separate. So give me an idea or scope of your data centers back then. When you first started, what did you have for a data center or data centers?
Okay, when I first started, we had one data center that was in a 150-year-old building down in the basement. And of course, that was on site of the hospital itself. It wasn't ideal conditions. We would overheat or get too cold, or walls would be leaking when it was raining. So it was not a lot of fun. It was closer to tier 1, tier 2 data center.
Wow. And that sounds pretty nerve-wracking. Let me guess, it was next to the boiler room as well in the basement?
Absolutely, it was. The boiler room was right next door. We actually vented into where our UPS was sitting, and our UPS was actually in one room, or two UPSs. So that it didn't really help us out.
And I'm sure there was never a blast wall between the two as well. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, I see that quite a bit, especially in hospital systems as well. This sounds like really nerve-wracking to start with. So let's go ahead, please.
It was. I mean, it was a challenge to keep systems up and running on a consistent basis. Yeah.
Right. So not only did you have the technology uptime, but you had environmental controls and hazards that you had to deal with as well.
That's correct. Yeah.
And how was access controlled back then to that data center?
Not very good. I mean, I think just before we moved out, there was something like 100 people had access to the data center, and they were not all IT. Facilities had access, and which you don't really want facilities to have access.
Absolutely. That, by the way, seems to be a very common source of tension, because facilities owns the building, and therefore, in their mind, therefore thinks that they have full rights to that data center. So again, I don't think that that's uncommon in almost any industry. So let's stay in that way back time machine. So let's talk about the DR program back then. So you're giving me a great sense of, I can visualize that the data center with the dripping stalagmites of water, but how was the DR program back then?
Basically non-existent. Like most companies, we had a contract with a third-party company that would roll up with a semi with approximate hardware to what we had in our data center. And unfortunately, it hadn't been really kept up. Basically, one person reviewed it and said, yeah, that's okay. It's encompassed the mainframe, but didn't really encompass all of the client server information or systems that we had in the data center at the time.
So more of a checklist. Yeah, it's good. We don't have to worry about it. Type of thing.
Exactly.
So was that so would we consider that third-party vendor who remains nameless more of a cold site? In other words, you had to spin it up and had to load it?
That's correct.
Oh, wow.
We would actually have to find a location to put the new systems that they brought in and bring them up. But there was just a semi, and that was it, loaded full of equipment.
Wow. So were there any so if there really wasn't much of a DR program then other than the safety of a trailer, and I put that in finger quotes, is what was your DR capability? So what was your recovery time capability then if you had to bring the trailers and spin it all up? It sure wasn't hours.
No, you're talking days. Absolutely days. Yeah, at that time we did have a mainframe, and once we would send the mainframe gentlemen and our backup tapes to an off-site location, and they would attempt to reload the tapes and bring up the mainframe.
Wow.
As I stated earlier, the mainframe wasn't all that we needed, but even then, that took 3 to 4 days.
Right, and that's a good. So, what was your senior leadership's focus or attention on the DR program at that time? Was it still just what I'm hearing, or was there more to it?
No, IT. They figured IT handled it. They kept it going.
Wow.
Unfortunately, for executives, the understanding of IT is not their forte.
So it's a don't ask, don't tell policy.
I wouldn't say that, but yeah.
Okay. So since you're affiliated with the university, let's stay in that time zone and give me a grade. What would you grade if we were sitting in a classroom on the DR program at the time?
C- would be the highest. I'm sorry, but I would have had no confidence in recovering at that time.
Understand. Wow. All right. So who was the owner of that recovery and resiliency? Was it you? Was it the actual, the mainframe operators? Who basically was shouldering that? Was it
One other,
distributed?
there was one manager that overlooked the contract, but basically the mainframe guys took care of the DR.
Wow. All right. So as we progress through time, was there ever a major incident or a tipping point that helped you gain the traction that you need in moving this forward?
Well, actually, there were a couple of them. As I said, the facilities had access to the data center in our own location, and there was no alarm going off, and they were trying to silence the alarm, and they pushed the emergency power off button.
The big red button, yes.
The big red button brought us down completely. And that's kind of started that we weren't sufficient in our DR processes. So it got handed to me to start developing a whole new program on how to do DR.
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned that. I was a CIO for a 24/7 university and had the same issues with facilities. And we had a flood in our data center, minor. And sure enough, one of the facilities came in and panicked and hit the EPO button.
Yeah. After that, until after we got moved out, we put a nice big piece of plastic around and said, "Do not push."
we put a biometric reader on the door and a plastic cover over top of the EPO as well. So learned. Excellent. All right, so let's kind of come into where we're at today. Can you give me what IT landscape itself looks like today? So you said heavy mainframe 7 years ago with distributed systems. Where are we today?
Well, the mainframe is gone. We have two separate data centers that are separated by at least 20 miles. The primary data center is 160 feet underground, and that, of course, houses most of our critical systems. And then the secondary data center has all of our backup and test equipment, so that if when necessary, we can fail over to the secondary data center. We are
I'm sorry.
No, we're about 85% virtualized, so that makes it much easier.
That sure does. Are you active, or is it more of an active passive role with the secondary data center you're saying?
It would depend on the application and its criticality. We do have some that are active and some that are active passive.
Ooh, you mentioned criticality. I think we'll get a little bit into that as well. So from a today's standpoint, what's the DR program look like? From two people back then, where are you today with that?
Well, we're still running it with two people.
Okay.
But we have developed 190 disaster recovery plans. This last year, we completed 13 functional tier 1 exercises of actually failing our systems from the primary data center to the secondary data center, and they actually sat there for about 2 months before we failed them back. We've done 7 infrastructure tests, which means, across our network and environment that. And then as the new building came up, our new hospital building came up, we did a disaster recovery test on it. So we came from, a kind of half contract to a very robust and effective and active disaster recovery program.
Wow, there must have been some defining moments along the way to get where you are in that. Is who else is involved? I mean, you mentioned the number of tests and plans, so let's just stay with that. So those plans, over 100 plans, who's building those plans? Actually,
the plans are built by all of our SMEs, the people who are responsible for those systems and those applications. And our DR coordinator, he helps facilitate that. and make sure that they keep them updated and that they're getting them done on timely manner.
Great. And marketing has made me ask this question. So where do you build and store your plans?
Actually, we're building the Resilience One.
See, I had to ask that question. So, thanks. So you're using Resilience One to build the plans. Are you also using the Resilience One capabilities for the testing or tabletops?
That's the plan for this year. We've just gotten them really used to using it, and we'll start now using it to do our exercises this year.
Oh, wow. That's excellent. And one of the things that I'm amazed to hear that one of the challenges that I see with our clients, and especially with IT teams, is they're going to push back because they say, I'm too busy, either I don't see the value or it's going to take too long. How did you overcome that obstacle?
Well, we see that too, and it was really very much so in the beginning. And so what we started doing was saying, hey, you're going to have to do this patch or this upgrade. Well, let us help you build the plan into this, and then we can do the test and make sure that what you think is working is actually working. So we're trying to use their own processes to bring them on board to get the development going.
So almost like a shared work response to initially kick it off.
Absolutely. And then when they're doing the exercise or when they're doing the test, we're right there with them and saying, okay, this is supposed to be your next step. Is that it? And so on and so forth. So we're sharing the pain with them.
And reaping the rewards.
Exactly.
So speaking of today in comparative mode, looks like you've come light years in getting the feedback and the ownership on those IT SMEs. I had asked you earlier on, what would be your recovery time capabilities back 7 years ago, and you said more than 3 days just for the mainframe. So now that the mainframe has been retired, what's your recovery time capability? And I'll put my finger quotes up again for your critical apps.
Okay, our critical apps are 0. They actually fail over automatically. It's completely transparent to the end users. And we do have a couple critical ones that are manual, and it's usually within 30 minutes. That's
amazing. That's awesome. One of the things that, I'm using the finger quotes for the term critical is, I usually see a gap of either the IT has embraced a disaster recovery and the BC side has not. There's always that gap. One drives the other, and it's usually BC driving IT DR. What did you experience over these last 7 years?
Actually, I think that we're driving BC. We keep trying to get them to identify our most critical applications and what order they'll come up. It's a business responsibility, but we haven't gotten that far yet. So we're still trying to drive that. So we of course made our own. And then as time goes through and we start developing more and more processes in DR, we start including our executive management, our emergency management, just sending them the after action reports and quarterly updates. And then of course, CMS has been a big factor in helping start a business continuity program.
Right. And so, so for the sake of those on this call that aren't familiar with the CMS ruling that came out in November of 2015 and gave us a year, can you tell me why it's such a big, and I'll use the term hammer, and a jump start for healthcare?
Well, it has a lot to do with the way healthcare gets paid. If they continually want to be paid from Medicare and Medicaid services, they have to meet these certain requirements and develop emergency management plans and a process to keep the organization running during an event.
Right, and involving in not only emergency response and the ITBC, but also the community, which is a really unique approach.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I will tell you the feedback from our others, and you can validate this or not, is that when you look at the percent of revenue that comes in from Medicare and Medicaid, our average is over 50%.
Oh, absolutely. And being a university hospital and where we're at, I would say ours is more than 50%. And with the baby boomers getting older, that's where more and more healthcare's revenue is going to come from.
That's exactly it. So for for those that are there that are in the healthcare, it really does speak volumes to protecting the the financial integrity of the organization. So from that perspective, so yeah, CMS has been a boon to helping healthcare organizations.
Absolutely.
So you talked a little bit about this, the DR pushing into BC and involving crisis and incident management. That's an awesome approach. By copying them in, are they now coming back to you and saying, hey, what's this all about, or how can I get involved?
Well, actually, we have been elected to sit on the business continuity steering board so that we can help them develop the program and the processes to run through.
Oh, that sounds really exciting.
It is.
Criticality, right? We both, you've mentioned it several times. Is what method are you using today for determining criticality of IT applications?
A lot of it is common knowledge, or tribal knowledge, I should say, but we're also using our engineering structure for it. When a new system comes in, it depends on how it's engineered. If it's automatic failover, of course it's more expensive and the department's going to have to pay for it. But that's where we start. But we do have critical applications that are still here that are not engineered that way, and we as an IT department have kind of learned over the years and identified which systems are truly critical. And so we've done it ourselves.
Okay, so you've done basically an application criticality analysis internal to IT.
That's correct.
Yeah, and well, you did say there's a gap between the DR and the BC side. What's your ultimate goal from criticality standpoint? Where is that going to come from? Next year, now that you're on the steering committee.
Right. Well, we are hoping that it comes from the business and that they can actually help us determine the true criticality of an application.
So,
some of it is common sense. Yeah, we need the EMR up, the electronic medical record, and so on. But then you come down to HR and finance, and which systems become really critical at that point.
Nice. So you're going to be using a BIA to help the business, or have the business give you the clarity that you need?
That's the hope. Yes.
Yes. And that will be, of course, an ISO 22317 BIA. So let's talk about, I'm hearing some really leapfrogging things. So you mentioned you had, the trailer. So were there any tools or vendors that were highly visible, engaged early on, that aren't, don't even get a PO or not engaged today?
In helping develop the DR program,
or just what you used, right?
Actually,
so the one was go ahead, please.
Yeah, we actually started with a paper template, that we created out of Microsoft Word or Excel, until it got to a point where you get so many applications, it's hard to manage, and we started to look at an application to help us not only manage the process, but also help us with this identifying criticality. And that's where Resilience One came in.
Excellent. Well, see, that was organic. I didn't even mean to ask that way. So how about the trailer vendor? Are you still using that vendor or anybody else now that you have that pretty much active role?
No, we are not. We've engineered to a point where that is no longer a necessary evil.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, something I heard which really I find is of high value is up front as you're bringing a new application in. So in that change control or change management process, you are actually getting involved in determining the resiliency for that application up front. And you said that if it's truly active, that cost gets passed back to the department. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Wow. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So how did that happen? I mean, that change control, usually they don't think about resiliency as part of bringing in a new application. All of a sudden it's okay, procurement does it, here you go, IT, and it doesn't matter whether it's education or or healthcare. It seems to be, the department says, I want a new Pyxis. There's no service level agreements or anything of that nature that's brought into consideration, and yet I hear you have inversed that.
That's correct. With any new application that comes in, before it goes into production, we require it to have a DR plan already created. And in doing that, we got involved with our project management office, and we walked them through the process of building disaster recovery plans. So that became a point in their process automatically, was that any new system or upgrade system would have to have a disaster recovery plan. And of course, that also leads over to our server team and their engineering levels in something that becomes the department wants to be up all the time, a real critical system. They send them the engineering specifications and says, this is what you're going to need, and this is how much it's going to cost. And then of course, all of that then before it goes into production comes up to the change advisory board, which is made up of IT management, and we review all that. And before anything goes into production, it's got to get a nod yes from the change advisory board.
Oh, excellent. So IT plays a role not only in the DR program, but they're actively involved in your testing. So you said you did what, 13 tests this past year, I believe?
That's correct.
Wow. And are they scripted tests, or are you actually, for all intents and purposes, pulling the fire alarm and watching the reaction time?
Well, it's kind of both. Like any IT department, we have incidents that happen periodically, and we try to identify those incidents that have caused our engineers to use the disaster recovery plan to recover. So we use those, and then we do have others that are scripted. That this time, this date, we're going to go ahead and do a disaster recovery process, making sure we get all the steps in their plan that are correct.
Beautiful. And based on that whole CMS rule, are you now starting to involve the businesses in that, or have you?
Actually, we have, and not actually because of the CMS rule, but we've invited the business owners to come and participate and watch as we do some of this. And it's been enlightening for them to realize what IT really does.
It's not just, did you turn it on, did you turn it off again? And that is, by the way, you say that, and from our experience with clients as well, is I think that's a key takeaway point, is involving the business with a test exercise, is they get an appreciation and an understanding for IT that they never did before. So when it comes time to, it's all about managing expectations. That's a great sales pitch.
Yes.
Subtle from IT to the business, because IT never does a good job of selling themselves.
No, they don't.
All right, so this is a follow, really kind of goes along with that, in that those times and those efforts, and this may really seem like a dumb question, but so for recovery time objectives, we kind of talked about that. They're really coming from IT at this point.
That's correct. Again,
Okay.
like we said, it's a lot to do with the engineering level. So we have 4 tiers.
Wow.
Self-healing, that is 0 downtime or as close as we can get to it. Sometimes things take a little longer to fail over. Up to 2 weeks, which is non-critical to us. Yeah.
Gotcha. Right. So you've got 4 tiers that you've set, and I'm sure once you get the business involved, those will expand out to give you a little bit more room, but also take it from a recovery from a business perspective.
That's the expectation, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So early on, from an automation standpoint, you said you're about 85% virtualized.
Yes.
Wow. All right. So let's talk about the remaining 15%. And my big question for you is why? Or why not? What's holding us back?
Some of it is legacy. The vendor hasn't brought up their specs or their code to enable the application to use automated, failover systems. And some of it's FDA. Since they regulate so many of our applications, the FDA has approved this configuration, and we can't vary from that.
Wow. So it sounds like we've got some challenges there.
Absolutely.
As far as getting the FDA up to the 1990s.
Yes.
Totally understand that. So the IT SME, right, from what you talked about as a casual, it seems to have changed in its role of DR over time and becoming more proactive than reactive. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
That is correct. The SMEs are actually building the plans or updating the plans long before we ask them. They're coming to us and saying, "Hey, this plan's been updated. It replaces the other one."
Wow, that's awesome to hear. And it usually takes a lot of time to do that. You're talking about right now IT determining the RTO. In a previous life, I used to be for an institute, CIO at an institute of higher learning, and then I ran an international travel company. And the biggest challenge that we saw in IT was that when business would actually come, and it was a very similar situation where IT DR drove everything. But yet we would have the businesses come and talk and say, "Hey, we want our application up in this time frame," which is usually yesterday. So how do is that happening with you? Are you having some of the businesses, as you create this awareness, come and say, "Hey, I want this"?
We have had that, and that usually comes from a department that doesn't have a lot of money, for their budget. And we show them what it would take to get them to the level they want to be. And by using, this is their budget, this is what it's going to cost, it will come down, oh, maybe I don't need quite that fast of recovery. If they do, they'll find the money.
Right. So it's a shared pain. You pay for it, and we'll build it.
Exactly.
And this question comes up quite a bit when we do our on-site engagements is, okay, that's the initial cost. That's the hard cost, right? That's my blades, that's my lungs, that's my storage. But what about the soft costs? Are the business offsetting the cost for that network engineer or that dedicated SQL person to run that and manage that app?
Depending on the size of it. But usually IT absorbs those costs.
Yeah, that's typical.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that as well. So let's talk the plans itself. You had well over 100 plans, and the plans that I come across are the ones that are several hundred pages long with screenshots of every step and all of that. So is there a ton of, in yours, are there a ton of details with step-by-step pictures? Or are we more looking at it written by the SME for the SME? So it's a high-level recovery plan.
It's written by the SME for the SME. I think our largest one, which is our EMR, is about 19, 20 pages long. And that has a lot to do with, hardware requirements, vendor contact information. That's probably about a third of the plan. And then the rest of it would be the actual steps they need to follow.
Excellent, excellent. And those plans themselves are written for the SME, but are they shared? So is there just one person who's managing that plans, or in some cases, is it a role-based where that whole recovery area goes in and updates that?
It's usually one SME that does most of that, but they do have a backup, and they are both involved in the development of the plans and the testing of the plans, especially when we start getting into, the functional exercises. One time the SME will do it, the next time the other SME will do it.
Excellent. And the steering committee, you said you're now part of the steering committee. Was there, up until recently, a DR steering committee, or was that the change management? What was that kind of consisting of?
We do have a DR steering committee, and we would keep them informed on the progress of DR and ask for recommendations, or use them to apply a little pressure, especially in the early days. And their role has kind of changed a little bit now. We are pursuing a HITRUST certification. So they've tasked us to do a risk analysis of our IT environment and find out where the weaknesses are or the opportunities to improve upon to gain that HITRUST certification.
Excellent. Well, so what's HITRUST? I trust you, Eric. So we have a high level of trust. Is this unique to healthcare?
No, it's not. It's really kind of more or less a security. It started out as a security certification, and it's kind of expanded so that now if you are HITRUST certified, it encompasses ISO, it encompasses HIPAA, and several other regulatory organizations. So we're kind of trying to kill several birds with one stone.
Right. So HITRUST is not to be confused with high tech.
No.
Excellent. So let's talk about, you've got a great perspective here. And so, let me play the role of a BC planner, right? I'm pushing it, right? It's the inverse side of it. So what advice would you give to Chris as the BC planner who would love to get IT more involved?
Be prepared to have perseverance. It takes a lot of perseverance to change the culture, because that's what you're going to be wind up doing. You're going to change the culture of an organization, and that takes people out of their comfort zone. So it just takes a lot of perseverance, building relationships, showing how it can benefit each other.
You hit something that very few people in this industry see, that business continuity and DR are a true culture shift, right? That awareness, understanding, and value is driven and supported by those two teams. So the value, right? What's your value proposition? If you're going to the BC steering committee, what's your elevator pitch? How are you showing that value that's helping to change the culture? Was it?
Sorry, I blanked out there for a second.
It's okay. It was a hard one, right?
It was.
Yeah. So the value proposition, how you, when you talk about DR to the business, what's causing them to listen?
I think it comes down to having to use examples. A few years ago, a hospital in Joplin, Missouri was hit by a tornado. And they had happened just to finish kind of a whole process of disaster recovery and business continuity. And I use them as an example that, it can happen to us. We're not on the coast where we have all these hurricanes and, stuff going on, or in California where they have the earthquakes, but we're right in the middle of the United States, but we still have elements that we have to deal with. And I try to use that hospital as our example because it was really big at that time.
Right. And for our listeners, if you Google that and see those images, and they were up and running in a very short amount of time, and just a disaster that hit that hospital. It came right through, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Yes.
It was like, I think it was a little over 1.5 miles wide tornado F5 that took it out.
Yes. And the recovery plans were amazing. So Eric, in closing, is what advice would you give our listeners today from the ACP?
Transparency, and by that I mean sometimes it's better just go ahead and send the information to people you think might need it or might want it than it is just to ask them for it. That's kind of what we did with our leadership and our emergency management people. We just started sending them the after action reports, quarter reports, so that they had it, whether they wanted it or not.
Wow. Transparency wins, right? That's the old adage. What is it? It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when it comes to information.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Eric. Ed, I think we'll turn it over to you for some questions.
We have a ton of questions because this has generated obviously a lot of interest. So I'm going to get right into them so we don't waste a moment. Hopefully we can get to most of them. What is your process for application validation and checkout for your exercise, and have you automated that process?
We work with the SME and their manager to identify applications that are very good candidates, especially starting out for a disaster recovery test. And then we try to do it while they're doing something else. If they're going to be applying patches and they got to fail a system over to one side, let's go ahead and use that process that they're using to go ahead and perform this test.
Okay, great. Is your business continuity staff, it sounds like two of you, but whoever's doing it, are they using Resilience One yet, or do they plan to?
I do not know if they're planning to. They have been given the opportunity to use it.
Okay, that's fair. What technology are you using to keep data in sync for the active applications?
There are several. I'm trying to think of it off the top of my head. The storage automatically syncs back and forth. The application does dual writes to storage depending on which one is more prevalent for the application or supported by the vendor.
Okay, so the backups aren't that far away, so that it's probably synchronous, I guess.
Correct. The application can be synchronous. Even our backups on our systems, some of them are done every 15 minutes.
Okay, very good. And I don't know if you're able to share this, but someone asked what applications are active. Even if you just give an example or describe them, that would be good.
Epic, which is our EMR, is active. CorePoint, which is our interface engines, active.
Okay, good example. Epic is pretty well known in the industry.
Yes.
Okay, great. Regarding the mission criticality identification study that was done by IT, have those results been disseminated to the business owners or the end user? And what kind of feedback did you get on that?
No, that is strictly within IT.
Okay, okay, very good. Can you discuss the metrics that IT uses and that they provide to the business, and basically how do you maintain accountability to the business, including the use of the metrics?
We'll report on a quarterly basis on how many disaster recovery plans we either been exercised, a functional exercise, or a tabletop, or reviewed, and a total number of plans that we currently have in our portfolio. So every quarter we're doing a percentage. This is how much we did this quarter, and this is an overall percentage of how much is completed. And then on a yearly basis, we do a roll up of everything.
Okay. In my own question, do you like to what level? Like are you doing like a board presentation, or is there like a risk committee or something?
No, they don't have. We haven't gotten that far yet in the whole program. It's actually just an email that is sent out to our executive leadership.
Okay. Do you use an application for DR? And if so, can you share what it is?
Well, we're putting our plans, our disaster recovery plans, into Resilience One.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any pressure from management to move your data centers to the cloud?
That is being looked at, but only on a very limited basis at this time.
Okay. And I would assume there's, obviously security considerations and.
Well, that's the biggest thing. We continually hear about these hospitals who have gotten ransomware, this, that, or the other, or these organizations who have been hacked, and security is a key primary subject that we always are concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, that crosses all industries. I work for utility, so same thing. Very, very sensitive. Will the business continuity team plan to use the strategic BCP tool as well? We're talking about DR. So let me phrase that clearly. Will they be using strategic BCP tool?
We have offered it up to them. At this point, they haven't looked at it yet, so I couldn't really answer that.
Okay. So I guess the second part of the question is, do they plan to use it for their BIA? So we probably don't know that either.
Not yet.
And will you use it to identify gaps in DR RTOs or misalignment maybe?
As we get further into it with the BCP or with the business continuity program and with the BIA, yes, absolutely.
Okay. About how long did it take for you to get the program up and running?
Really sitting down and working with it, 14 days.
Wow. Okay, very good. And when you roll something new out, there's early adopters, there's people who get into it very late, if at all, and then you have a big chunk in the middle. Sometimes it's 20, 60, 20, it varies. Who were your early adopters, and how did you get them on board?
Our subject matter experts, the ones the system admins that do the applications, they saw how easy it could be just to insert a new command or a new line, something to update the plan, and how it can be related to so many different other applications or documents. It just made it really easy for them, and it's all in one place. And then when they print out a plan, it all prints out for them. It's all there.
Yep. Okay. And who outside of DR, maybe the better question is who outside of IT, but who outside of DR did you involve?
Nobody outside of IT, basically.
Yeah. Christopher, anything from you? Those are the questions I have. I know I went through them pretty quick, but there were a lot.
Wow,
I want to try to get
that's
through them.
great. Yeah. So no, and Eric and I are going to be working on getting that BC involvement in and helping him leverage that with his steering committee over the next year. So I think we got our work cut out for us, and especially with with Eric taking the lead there, this should be pretty easy peasy.
Well, maybe Eric makes it look easy peasy, but I'm going to tell you it probably isn't.
Oh no, I know it's not. But
Great. Okay.
He's been a benefit to them.
Well, first off, to everyone who's on the call, if you just stick around for 1 second, we have some announcements that you'll be interested in. Only take a moment. Thank you for attending today's program and webinar. And before that, I especially want to thank Christopher Duffy and Eric Jacobson for a great presentation, great discussion, a lot of good insight. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Ed.
And also our thanks to Strategic BCP for sponsoring today's webinar. Go to strategicbcp.com for information on how they can be of service to you. Be sure to watch the ACP website for future webinar information. And remember the mention I made at the beginning that if you have ideas for webinars, please send them to staff@acp-international.com. If you joined late today, this and previous webinars are recorded and they're made available to members on the ACP website. And finally, when you close your browser, a very, very brief survey about this webinar will pop up. If you would please take the 30 seconds that it takes to answer the questions, we really appreciate it. It really helps us refine these productions for you. Thank you all for being with us today, and have a great rest of the day.